You have addictions, I have addictions, we all have addictions. They often start small with no real consequences on our lives, but slowly start consume more and more of our time until they become real problems. You may have tried to quit those addictions in the past but haven't really succeeded ever. It feels like you're starting off strong but always end up relapsing and going back to normal after a week or even a few days. Throughout my life, I faced countless addictions myself, most of which I've successfully quit, and I want the same to happen for you. In this video, I'm going to break down an 8-step process to get rid of any addiction you have in your life. Be careful, this is not a quick fix and it will take you a lot of time, but if you're actually serious about quitting the addictions that have been messing up your life for probably the last years, this is the best framework I've ever used to quit any addiction you might have. Now when you think about it, at a fundamental level, the only way we can really quit an addiction is by abstaining from it. And I know that sounds very obvious, but it's how you abstain that really matters. I'm going to walk you through a method called the Abstinence Method, which won't guarantee you'll quit your addiction because you're still responsible for doing it properly, but if you pay really good attention to this and apply things properly, you will quit your addiction for good. So let's begin. Step number 1, define a list of addictions. The first step here is to make ourselves aware of all the addictions we really have. For this, you'll need to use the following questionnaire to see what you are and what you're not actually addicted to. Walk each of your potential addictions through these questions. Do you have an inability to stop despite a strong desire to do so? Do you take or do more than you intended? Do you get strong cravings for a specific behavior or substance? Do you spend lots of time doing or trying to get the behavior or substance? Do you have a lack of control over a certain behavior or substance? Do you know it leads to health, relationship, social, economic, or moral problems? Do you continue using despite being aware of the consequences? Do you need to increase doses over time to feel the same hit? And finally, do you start to prioritize that behavior or substance over other events that were previously a priority, family events, sports practice, and so on? I want you to walk each potential addiction you might have through these questions to actually confirm that you're addicted to that thing. Don't try to pretend you're not addicted to something when you actually are. The first step to improving your life through removing an addiction is actually admitting you're addicted to that thing. Once you've done this, you'll make a list of all your confirmed addictions. At the moment, I've pretty much quit all the addictions that had a negative impact on my life, but a few years ago my list would have looked something like this. Junk food, video games, pornography, and social media. No substances, just behaviors. Yours might look something like this. Junk food, video games, smoking, Netflix. This list might actually be a lot longer depending on how many addictions you actually have. Now, it's important you have broad categories of addictions, not more specific ones, and the reason is because that is the next thing we'll cover. So now that we've defined broad categories of addictions we have, we'll need to define subcategories in case it's appropriate. With my previous list of addictions, this would look something like this. Within the junk food category, I would have unhealthy breakfast, snacks at 10 AM, and mellow cakes at 4 PM. Within the video games category, I would have Fortnite, Call of Duty, and Clash of Clans. Within the pornography category, there wouldn't be anything specific, and within the social media category, there would be YouTube and Instagram. Now for you, this might look something like this. Within the junk food category, you might have snacks at 10 AM, McDonald's at 12 PM, and pizza at 8 PM. Within the video games category, you might have Call of Duty, League of Legends, and PUBG. Within the smoking category, there wouldn't be any specific subcategories, and within the Netflix category, you would have Walking Dead, Squid Game, and Prison Break, for example. The reason this might be important is because often quitting an entire category at once will be too difficult. If I told you to abstain from all forms of junk food for a year, you wouldn't be able to do it, but if I told you to replace your 10 AM snack with fruits for that same year, it would seem much more realistic and highly increase your chances of actually quitting it. To know if you should do this, ask yourself if it's even possible to divide a broad category into multiple subcategories, and also if it makes sense for your specific situation. Are you addicted to multiple video games or just one? Are you addicted to multiple shows or just one? Then after this, it can also be a good idea to determine how addicted you are to those things. From a scale from 1 to 10, how addicted would you consider yourself to be? This can be useful in the case that you might have many different addictions that are very small addictions, like a 2, 3, or 4, and which you could quit at the same time without too many issues. If it's a stronger addiction like a 7, 8, or 9, it's a much better idea to only focus on that one. So divide broad categories of things you're addicted to, divide those into multiple subcategories if it makes sense, and give a score from 1 to 10 of how addicted you are to all of them. Step number 2, ranking your addictions. The next step we must complete is to ranking our addictions from highest impact to lowest impact. Each addiction we have has a certain level of negative impact on the goals we have for ourselves. Some addictions have a higher negative impact on our ability to achieve our goal, and other addictions have a lower negative impact on our ability to achieve our goal. And the way you will rank your addictions from highest to lowest negative impact will depend on the goal you have. Let me give you a couple examples. If your main goal is productivity, high negative impact addictions will include junk food, video games, social media, and Netflix. Low negative impact addictions might be smoking, for example. Smoking is obviously still bad for you, but it will not destroy your ability to be more productive. If your main goal is fat loss, high negative impact addictions will include junk food, video games, and Netflix. Lower negative impact addictions will include social media and smoking. If your goal is becoming healthier, the high impact addictions will include junk food and smoking. The low impact addictions will be video games, social media, and Netflix. In this case, quitting smoking is a much bigger priority than with fat loss or productivity. Based on your goal, you'll need to define which addictions will have a high impact on your ability to achieve that goal and which ones will have a low impact. Now, this doesn't mean that you won't try to quit the lower impact addictions, but it just means that you will simply put your attention on the things that really matter first. If my goal was changing my body composition, I would rank my previous addictions in this way. First, junk food. Second, video games. Third, pornography. And fourth, social media. For you, it might look something like this. First, junk food. Second, video games. Third, Netflix. And fourth, smoking. The second step after this is to also rank subcategories individually. Within junk food, certain things you do have a bigger impact than others. Some video games are more addictive to you and are more of a problem. For my previous addictions, it would again look something like this. So in first place we had junk food, and the worst thing within junk food was mellow cakes at 4 p.m. The second worst thing was unhealthy breakfast, and the least worst thing was snacks at 10 a.m. Then in the second category, video games, the worst and most addictive thing was Fortnite, the second worst thing was Clash of Clans, and the least worst thing was Call of Duty. Then within the pornography category you had nothing, and in the fourth category, social media, Instagram was the worst and YouTube was the least worst. For you, it might be something like this. The first category was junk food, and within junk food, pizza was the worst thing you could do, McDonald's was the second worst thing you could do, and snacks at 10 a.m. was the least worst thing you could do. Then in the second category, video games, Call of Duty was the worst thing, League of Legends was the second worst thing, and PUBG was the least worst thing. Then within the third category, Netflix, the worst thing might have been Squid Game, second worst thing Prison Break, and the least worst thing Walking Dead. And then finally, the fourth category, smoking, didn't have any subcategories. Once you've done this for your own addictions, you're done with this step. Step number 3, gathering data. The third step of this process is to gather as much information as we can surrounding each addiction that we have. This will help us understand many things about it and also help us a lot once we actually begin abstaining, and I'm going to give you a list of questions for inspiration. You don't have to answer every single question, but it does help to have these answers once you're actually starting to abstain from that addiction. So here's a list of questions. What do you do? Eat, play, consume. How often do you do it? When do you do it? Where do you do it? With who do you do it? When are you most likely to relapse? Where are you most likely to relapse? With who are you most likely to relapse? What are my triggers? Location, time, objects, people, preceding events. What emotions am I feeling when I'm about to relapse, and so on. There's more questions you can ask yourself, but this should already be a good enough list. You ideally want to do this for all the addictions you have, as this will make things very clear. Step number 4, clarifying objectives. Our fourth step is to define the objectives of each addiction that we have. We have our list of addictions, we have that list ranked from highest to lowest impact, and we gathered some data, although not all data, surrounding those addictions. Now we need to figure the why question. Why do we do what we do? Whenever we engage in anything, there's always an objective or a reason why we do it. The reason we work is usually to make money and make sure our basic survival needs are met. The reason we get into relationships is to fulfill our needs of intimacy and sex, at a fundamental level at least. You have to understand that each addiction we engage in has some sort of purpose, even though it might seem silly. We never do things that don't have a single benefit in our lives. When we smoke, we're reducing our stress levels, which makes us feel better. When we play video games, we're fulfilling our desires of achievement and sense of status. When we eat junk food, we make sure we're getting enough calories and energy for survival. Even the most stupid things we do have a purpose. We go on social media because we feel bored, and boredom doesn't feel very good. Regardless of how irrational it might seem, every behavior we partake in has an objective, and there's a reason why we do it. What we need to do is identify those objectives for every addiction we have and make them clear. We need to define the why part of each addiction we have. So there's essentially two main reasons why we engage in those behaviors. First is negative emotion relief, and second is fundamental human need satisfaction. Almost all the addictions we have are there because of those two reasons. They either help us relieve negative emotions we feel, or they give us an illusion of fulfilling our fundamental human needs. Now here's a few examples of addictions and why we may do them. As you can see, it always comes back to negative emotional relief or fundamental human need satisfaction. This list is to give you some inspiration for why you do certain things in your life and why you engage in certain behaviors. Step number 5, clarifying problems. Now, the 5th step is identifying problems related to our addiction. Even though there's always a clear objective for each addiction that we engage in, often instant pleasure, there's also problems and consequences that come from engaging in those behaviors. Those can include health, moral, social, wealth, relationship problems, and so on. Here's a few examples again. You have to understand that each addiction you currently suffer from has negative consequences on you and your goals. Now, for many of you, you'll have a hard time fully identifying how a certain addiction affects you negatively. Most of us are not able to see the full extent of the consequences of our addiction while we're still using or doing them. And there's 2 reasons for this. First is because high dopamine behaviors and substances cloud our ability to accurately assess cause and effect. The world is sensory rich and causal poor. Daniel Friedman. We know junk food has a good taste in the moment, but we're a lot less aware that eating junk food every day for a month adds 10 pounds of fat. We're very good at knowing a behavior feels good, but we're a lot worse at assessing how a behavior will impact us in the long run. Second reason is that young people, even highly addicted ones, tend to feel the negative consequences of addictions a lot less. Those are some of the advantages of being young, even though it's actually more like a disadvantage. However, as you age, you begin to feel the consequences more and more, and they begin to affect you a lot more. I often hear adults telling stories about them getting drunk when they used to be younger and being relatively fine the next day, but if they did the same thing now, they would need a lot longer to recover from that night. So even though you'll probably have a hard time identifying the problems related to your addiction, I still want you to try and find a couple things. By the way, I help men build up an aesthetic physique, so if quitting your addiction is a problem you're currently facing during that journey, I can personally help you with that. There's a link down below. Step number 6. Starting the process. So now we're actually getting to the meat of things. This is the part where we're actually abstaining from our addiction. Now there's a couple steps you'll need to follow to successfully do this. First, pick your highest impact addiction. Previously, we've defined all of our addictions and ranked them from highest impact to lowest impact on our ability to achieve our goal. What I need you to do right now is pick the one that is at the top of your list. If I take my previous list again, the worst thing that I would need to quit was my milk cake addiction after school. So that is the one I need to pick. Second is to make a plan of abstinence. And next, we need to define a plan on how we'll successfully abstain from that addiction. For this, you will need your list of questions you answered from the 3rd step. Then, based on your answers, you will start to define a small plan. That plan doesn't have to be in depth. You'll look at when you do it and when you're most likely to relapse. This is the time block you have to be most careful of. You'll look at where you do it and where you're most likely to relapse. This is the place you'll need to be most careful of. You'll look at who you do it with and who you're most likely to relapse with. This is the person or people you'll need to avoid. And you look at your main triggers, which could be a specific time, location, mood, person, preceding event, and so on. Define a small plan of places, times, and people you should be careful of. Third is to start the abstinence process. So now is the time to actually start abstaining from the addiction you just picked. It's important you just pick one and stick with that one for the entire abstinence period. Do not change other variables of your lifestyle, no matter how motivated you feel. Have some control, keep one main addiction to quit in mind, and stick with it. The abstinence period will last exactly 30 days, and the reason that number is ideal is because of 2 reasons. First, our brain perceives a 30-day horizon to be realistic to stick to. If you had to abstain from whatever addiction you have for a complete year, it would feel way too much. A 30-day horizon seems much more realistic for our brain. Second, 30 days will be enough to fully quit a behavior. This will obviously depend on the addictive potential of your drug and how addicted you personally are, but around 30 days seems to suffice. Now, in order to abstain successfully, we'll employ a few methods. The first method is to apply something called self-binding, which is essentially the act of creating barriers between you and your addiction. The main goal of this is to create as much friction to engage with our addiction as we can, so that we're much less likely to actually relapse. So there's 3 main ways you can create barriers between you and your addiction. Physical self-binding, chronological self-binding, and categorical self-binding. Physical self-binding is when you create physical barriers between you and your addiction. Throwing the cookies out of the house, locking the PS4 in a closet, or putting your phone away in a locked safe. These are all examples of physical self-binding. Chronological self-binding is when you create time barriers between you and your addiction. You might allow yourself to watch TV only after 7 p.m. or allow yourself to go on your phone between 4 and 8 p.m. These are all examples of chronological self-binding. Categorical self-binding is when you allow yourself and don't allow yourself to consume certain things. You might only allow yourself to consume certain types of food rather than others. Now, out of all three forms of self-binding, the only one we'll use is physical self-binding. We're not trying to quit our addiction, but still do it half the time. We want to quit things fully, so the only real useful thing we can use is physical self-binding. I want you to find ways to create barriers between you and your addiction. If you have a very strong phone addiction at night, ask a family member to hide it somewhere you can't find it each evening. If you have a junk food addiction, stop having it in the house. If you order too much food online, delete and block these apps. These will obviously not guarantee that you'll quit your addictions, but it will create a lot more friction to do them. Now, the second method, which can be used to increase your chances of successfully abstaining, is stimulating your brain with healthy forms of dopamine. The main reason why it feels so chaotic in your brain when you're abstaining from an addiction is simply because it is craving dopamine. Now, we don't want to give ourselves bad forms of dopamine, but what we can do is give ourselves healthy forms of dopamine. They will never fully satisfy you, but they will help. There's 5 main things you can do whenever you feel like you're about to relapse, which will help you out. First is exercise/walking. Second is cold/warm exposure. Third is reading. Fourth is watching documentaries/podcast. And fifth is working. Now, these might not seem like fun things to do, but trust me, when you're really craving something, distracting yourself with one of these will help you a lot without damaging your dopaminergic system. Try one of these whenever you're craving your addiction. That is the second method. So in summary, define all your addictions, rank them from highest to lowest impact, gather information around them, define their objectives, define the problems associated with them, abstain for 30 days, one addiction at a time, and manage your cravings with both methods mentioned. Now, the most important factor from now on is avoiding to forget this. The first time I tried this method, I applied everything for 2 weeks, but then I started to forget that I was supposed to abstain. By nature, this method takes a lot longer than other ones, and it's therefore a lot easier to forget. That's why I got a few methods I'm going to share with you to help you not forget. The first method is to hang a day tracker on your wall. This is where you have a visual representation of all the days you still need to complete for the month. To make this, open up a Google Docs document and add a table with 30 squares. This represents the amount of days you'll need to abstain for. You can use the template down below to help you with this. The second method is to hang your list of addictions. Next to your day tracker, you could hang your list of addictions ranked from highest impact to lowest impact to remind you of the addictions you still need to quit. The third method is to hang the answers next to your day tracker. In the third step, we give ourselves a lot of information regarding the addiction we were trying to quit. It helps if you hang that list of information next to your day tracker to remind yourself of when, where, and who you need to be careful of. Number 4 is to set a reminder for this video. I want you to set a reminder to watch this video again in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so on. This way you'll always be reminded of this framework. You can use the comment section as accountability that you will quit whatever addiction you're trying to quit and leave notifications open so you can always see the people supporting you. So again, if you need me to help you implement all of these things because you're confused about how to go about it, there's a link down below. Check it out if you want. So that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Leave a like, leave a comment. If you want to have a complete roadmap on how to build an aesthetic body, you can click on this video right here on screen.